I'm Andrea Cash. I help the League of Women Voters of North Carolina with their communications. Thank you all for being here. I know it is a packed agenda tonight, so without any further delay, I will turn it over to Sandra Mao. She is a board member with League of Women Voters of North Carolina.
Thank you, Andrea. And thanks everybody for being here. I am with Henderson County, also a member of the Henderson County League in North Carolina. And I am the co-chair for this policing practices working group. And members of the working group come from a number of local leagues from across the state of North Carolina. Next slide, please. We organized in June following the death of George Floyd. My decision to form this group with my co-chair, Martha Robley from Mid-Sand Hills Member at Large Unit was not made lightly. I've been a member of League for over 15 years. I've always fully supported all of our voting initiatives, but remained less than enthusiastic sometimes on other issues we work on. But many of the issues we advocate for and against are interconnected, and I see a direct link between the racial inequalities in our criminal justice system and voting, because voting determines who will be making and enforcing our laws and how they go about it. So our group formed, everyone with their own reasons, and we wanted to find out, is there some influence to be had here? My general thought as a starting place was, if law enforcement believes it has some kind of mandate from me to treat one group of people differently from another group of people, whether special treatment or harsh treatment, I need them to understand, no, they don't have that mandate from me. So tonight we're talking about next steps. In order for the League to take action on an issue like policing practices, our members first must come to an understanding and agreement. We've confirmed there's no position at the national or state level that specifically addresses policing issues. And without that, we can't weigh in on any legislative solutions that might address these issues as an organization. We've been working to educate ourselves and others on current policing practices in North Carolina and examining the intersection of community with our law enforcement agencies. More specifically, the need for citizen input into the community impact of policing policies and the need for citizen oversight. We've reached our last program, and tonight we'll discuss the possibilities for doing a consensus study or concurrence to develop a policy position about policing practices in our state. So here's our plan for tonight's program. First, we're going to have a brief summary of our first 4 programs. Next, we've invited some special guests to provide information on the various paths that are available for us to pursue a position and to tell us about their experiences in developing and adopting positions on criminal justice. Then we want to hear from you. We want to give every member a chance to speak your mind on this topic of whether to pursue a position or not, and what you think the best way to go about that would be if you favor moving forward. We may have some non-members with us tonight, and you are welcome to observe our process. And Andrea, I guess this is a good time to launch our first poll question, which is, are you a member of the League currently or not? And that way we'll have a sense of who's in our audience tonight. And while you're answering, I'd like to thank the State League for their support of our programs through the use of their Zoom account, their YouTube channel, and most of all, for the talents of our communications specialist, Andrea Cash. Andrea has supported us with help with the registration, marketing, and all manner of technical issues, and we really couldn't do this without her. Okay, so the results, we have a few non-members with us, and we again want you to know you are welcome to observe our process, and we hope you understand when it comes time for comment, we reserve that time for our League members to give us direction on where we go from here. So with that, I'll turn the floor over to League member Ernest Mao of Henderson County.
Thank you very much. So when we got started, we wanted to learn basic information about our local law enforcement agencies.
Next slide, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Sorry.
That's okay. We wanted to learn about our local law enforcement agencies by focusing on a specific area each month. We learned a lot. We tried to share what we learned in each presentation, but for every question we answered, we found we came up with more questions. So our first presentation way back in August looked at who our local agencies were, both police and sheriff's offices, and how they communicate with the communities that they serve. We found that there are over 600 separate agencies throughout North Carolina, and about 1/3 of these have fewer than 10 sworn officers. Over the course of this project, we found that While many of the local law enforcement agencies we approached would talk to us, others were far less helpful. Most local law enforcement agencies have social media outlets, with Facebook and Twitter being the most popular. Some use these platforms as public relations tools, while others use it in kind of a more official capacity. Most we found were up to date, and they seem to encourage feedback from the public. Now, most agencies have contact numbers on their website or their city or county websites, and many have identified public information officers or community outreach officers for us to contact. And some even have specific information or links for citizen complaints. We found that some agencies in North Carolina offer citizens academies, which can be an immersive program for you to meet with your local leadership, learn in depth about their missions, and start to develop a long-term relationship. Our takeaway from that presentation was contact your local agency and start talking with them now. Now, North Carolina has 2 state commissions that implement and oversee hiring standards, one for police agencies and the other for the 100 sheriff's offices in the state. We believe we're the only state that has a separate commission to cover the sheriffs. Both commissions have similar standards with some differences. For example, the Sheriff's Commission does not require psychological review for hiring. Both commissions operate similarly in granting law enforcement certification to officers, with minor differences in paperwork. Both commissions enforce statewide standards for hiring, but your local agencies can exceed those standards. The Sheriff's Commission is made up of 12 sheriffs and 5 government appointees, and the Criminal Justice Commission has 34 members appointed from law enforcement, government, and academia. Both state commissions hold open meetings quarterly in Raleigh. Now, those same 2 commissions also control the training required for every officer and deputy. Basic law enforcement training for incoming officers and deputies is reviewed on a regular basis and is currently under review. The required North Carolina curriculum stands at 640 hours, and that's slightly higher than the national average. Many people feel those numbers should increase significantly, and some agencies already require and provide more training for their basic officers. Other recommendations include adding more classes in ethics, community policing, de-escalation of force, mental health issues, and other. Annual in-service training, this is for working law enforcement officers, is reviewed every year and is often influenced by current events and occasionally citizen input. While there are statewide requirements, each local agency can tailor additional training to meet local concerns. Training costs money to develop, and it takes time and manpower to deliver. Many people feel that funds should be reallocated to reflect community priorities in staffing and training. Now, budgeting is usually discussed and decided at city council and county commission meetings. In North Carolina, there are very few citizen boards with oversight duties, and those that do exist cannot compel testimony, subpoena records, or enforce disciplinary action. They are mostly powerless, and their impact on police actions is unknown. Because of current personnel records laws, internal investigations and results are not public record. Even the fact that there's an ongoing investigation is not available. If criminal charges are filed, or if an officer goes to an administrative court on an appeal, then that information from those procedures can become public. These rules also apply to the 2 state commissions investigating whether to rescind an officer's certification. Local leadership and the prevailing police culture play a large role in the effectiveness of internal oversight. Next slide, please. Early into this, we knew we could not do this by ourselves. And throughout our project, we met many people from state and local agencies who talked to our members and shared their expertise with us. These public servants, officers, and civilians patiently explained policy and procedure, answered scores of questions, and took time out of their busy schedules to help us understand the police role in our communities. Sandra?
Thanks. Next slide, please. So we have a few further thoughts from our group as we finish our summary of our first 4 programs. I wanted to touch on a couple of things. First and foremost is making those connections as individuals and as an organization with our law enforcement leaders. We want to encourage you all to meet at least annually with your police chiefs and sheriffs to make sure they know about our organization and that our members are engaged citizens, and just to generally maintain a good relationship. Second, we gathered a lot of useful information and made some good contacts. So there's a possibility of developing a good toolkit for local leagues to use for your own programs if there's any interest in us doing that. We got lots of ideas, and we'll talk more about that at our next group meeting in January, which we'll give you the details on at the end of this program. So for the next portion, we've invited Melissa Currence, a member of the League of Women Voters of Cincinnati and a director on the board of the National League, to join us. Melissa has experience in so many areas of the league, I can't even begin to list them all for you, but you may be familiar with her work at the national level on the Young People's Task Force or the What Would Alice Do podcasts. We've asked her to help us in 2 areas tonight. She's going to run down the basics for us on league study, concurrence, and consensus, and she's going to help us facilitate our member discussion later in the program. So welcome, Melissa.
Great, thank you, Sandra. I'm so excited to be here. I think this topic is so important, so I'm glad that North Carolina League is tackling it and then getting the input from the members on how to go forward. So I'm delighted to be here with you all. So I think we're ready for the next slide. What I'm going to talk about and what Sandra had asked me to discuss is like the path to a position. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that and talk about kind of some of the ways to go about that. But first of all, I just want to talk about why we do, or a process on how we do this kind of work. So what's really important with the league work in terms of our policy positions is our grassroots structure. So the power of the league is our grassroots. So we are the grassroots. Local, state leagues help inform the national positions. The local leagues and local members inform the state positions. And then you also have that ability to form positions at the local level, like at your annual meeting. So that's why it's really important to get people involved in these discussions, because we're only as powerful as people meeting and working through these issues. So, so to go through some of the options here on your screen, we have the first one here. We're talking about a consensus study. So, and I do want to back up a little bit and just say that program planning is really important as we start moving towards like state convention or national convention. So it's kind of like the runway. If we're gonna, if you all decide to go ahead and decide a consensus study or concurrence, you would, it's kind of the work up towards convention. So, so I believe that the work should be ramping up soon on program planning statewide and maybe at your local level as well. But kind of the way that we create a program or positions is doing these different ways. So the first one here is we have consensus, and you can read there, it says local leagues work on an issue through member study and agreement on broad concepts. Consensus is really about the feeling of the group, like taking the temperature of the room. It's not about if you have a vote and the nays, maybe the nays aren't the majority. In consensus, you would still take the nays into account, and so you take the sense of the room. Consensus is about, there's no winners or losers, but you work until you feel that that people can live with what you're talking, like what you are proposing. So you kind of work through it until you feel like, okay, I can live with this. And there's really, it kind of takes away this idea of like a winner and a loser in the system. So that's a really important strategy that the League has used for many years. A lot of other advocacy groups use consensus. I feel like the League as our, it's really important to our grassroots process. What kind of the downside, or maybe the upside to consensus, is it can take a long time to kind of work through those issues. But really, once you get there, you know that your members are really feeling it, and like it's a position that you can that your members are feeling good about. So you have great buy-in when you're using a consensus process. Concurrent. So my last name is Currence, and you would think I would know all about concurrence because you'd think I would be a banker too with my last name, but that's not the case. But what concurrence does is it's taking what other leagues around the United States. So like if North Carolina would, if they were going to do a concurrence process, they would look to another state league's policy position that they've worked on, and then just kind of take it whole hog and say, yes, we concur with the findings that this other league has done. And so what's nice about that is that you don't have to go through your own study process. It can be something that is faster, maybe cheaper if you have to put resources into a study. Concurrence is kind of taking the good work from others and saying, yes, we agree with this. So that's one way. And then I talked a little bit about the program or the policy positions of the league. So LWVUS, and I talked about convention, there's state convention and national convention. So the delegates at those conventions vote on policy. So there are so many policies that are already in place. So if you look at the National League, we have something called the impact on issues. I know North Carolina has the public policy position statements that you can refer to. So there's already positions that the membership has agreed upon in terms of justice reform, representative government, and social policy to take actions already. And then kind of the other option that we have, or you all have, is just continuing to educate yourself. So there's nothing wrong with asking more questions, understanding the issue more, and I think that's always good. So that's something that you don't necessarily have to do the other three. You could kind of stay in this informal study position, but so yeah, I don't know if there's any questions on that, and maybe what we'll do is we'll take questions maybe through the chat, or hopefully I made that understandable, but I can also, if there's any questions in the chat, I'd be happy to go through after I present. So I think we'll go ahead to the next slide. And so just looking at the what's the field looking like in this particular position of criminal justice. So the working group here has looked at what the other states have done and found that 32 states have positions regarding criminal justice. And you can see that it could review these positions for concurrence. Looking at these positions, most the criminal justice positions are related to victims, perpetrators, and the judicial system. The enforcement arm of the process is not often addressed. So I know that that's something very important to this working group. And so we're finding that these states have positions regarding juvenile justice, schooling, and training options to help with reentry, where someone who's formerly incarcerated kind of reentering society, alternatives to incarceration and then sentencing, positions on policy practices, while few do exist, it would be pertinent to look further for concurrence on this subject. I do just want to give a quick little shout out to this, and maybe you all know the League of Women Voters Clearinghouse, where and I'll put it in the chat if we don't have a link to it, but it's a resource of all the state and local studies that have gone around in the field, and it's a really great way to see quickly what people are doing and how they found that research. So that's a really great tool for you to use, not only state league, but in your local leagues as well. I think we're ready for the next slide. So yeah, the current North Carolina social policy position concerning criminal justice, obviously you all know this better than I do, but there is a position that that you have as part of your public policy positions, and it's listed. I believe this is the current one, right, Sandra? Yeah. So I'm not going to read all of it, but yes, this is what you have to work with, and I guess the next step would be deciding how else you want to build upon this if you need to do that. Anything else that I missed, or Sandra or Martha, if you'd like to jump in on that?
No, I think that was very helpful. If anybody doesn't have any questions for Melissa, we've got a minute or two, but I don't see anything in the chat. So, but keep in mind to put your questions in the chat as we go along, and we will try to, try to address them.
Okay.
So who's next?
Next slide, please.
Yes. There we go.
Thanks. As Melissa just explained, one of our options or paths is to use a concurrence process where we'll ask North Carolina League members if they agree with the position adopted by another league. We did discover that there are maybe a half a dozen or so leagues around the country that have done studies that are more narrow on policing, or maybe they looked at that topic within their criminal justice study. So to help us decide whether the concurrence process may or may not be our best option, we invited members from 2 leagues to speak to us this evening about their league studies, including what process they went through or are still going through, how long it took, what action, if any, they have been able to take. The first one is Mary Leopold, and she is from the League of Women Voters of Metro St. Louis. Mary chairs her league's policing study group. As you will hear from Mary, the Metro St. Louis League has not completed their study. They're in the midst of doing a study, but it is focused on policing. Following Mary, you will hear from Ashley Revech, the Deputy Director, Social Policy for League of Women Voters of California, and also with her is Carolina Goodman, who co-chairs the Committee on Criminal Justice Reform from the Los Angeles League. They will tell us about their study on criminal justice, which included use of force and racial justice. The California leagues have completed their study. Due to time limitations and the number of attendees we have tonight, which is very nice to see, we'll probably not be able to queue people up to ask questions of our presenters. So if you do have a question, please type those into the Zoom chat box, and we'll try to respond to them either during the member discussion portion of our program, or we'll get back to you after the program as appropriate. And with that, I will turn it over to Mary.
Thank you very much, Martha. I appreciate that. Hello, everyone. As Martha said, my name is Mary, and I'm with the League of Women Voters in St. Louis. It's a metropolitan area, so 7 different counties. I will tell you about what's going on with us. The goal of our study group is to create a position statement. So it's one of those consensus, that option number 1, create a position statement for our local league so that then we can use it to advocate for improvements in our local policing. We're following the 10 steps for a study process put out by the League of Women Voters nationally. So that means we start by choosing a focus, and ours is the oversight of police by the community. And we flesh that out a little bit with a scope statement. And our scope statement is we are studying whether or not citizen oversight boards are effective in creating and maintaining healthy relationships between citizenry and law enforcement through the reduction of the use of excessive force and bias. So just to restate that a little bit, we're very interested in excessive force and cutting that down. And by looking at that, we know that we will be working on racism as well, because excessive force is used disproportionately against people of color. But more specifically, we said, well, there's so many ways to come about that, and probably all the ways need to act in parallel, but we need to focus on something. So what we chose was community oversight. And we're studying that to see if it can be effective, because our view is, after our so much reading and talking and learning that we've done so far, is that many times citizen oversight is ineffective. It often fails in its goals because there are just so many ways it can get derailed. It can become ineffective because of all those things, if it doesn't have all the right ducks in a row, or it doesn't last, or it's just window dressing for the police departments. So we're trying to figure out if it can be effective, and if so, what are all the requirements that it needs in order to be effective. So our process is simply the one the league puts forward for the consensus process to get to a position statement. We are, we have done steps 1, 2, and 3. We're working on steps 4 and 5, which means we're still gathering information, much like the North Carolina League has been doing, and we're starting to share it with general league members. We have not begun steps 6 to 10. Pitfalls that we've run into so far. We started with so many varied interests. People came to our group with interest in general in the criminal justice system. So it took us a long time to choose a focus, although we finally did. We also had a lack of clarity, which you guys do not have, in the beginning, that we were even supposed to be making a position statement. So that took a while to iron out. We had a lot of turnover in the group. And at this point, we've got a solid group, but it's not a large one. We've got 5 people who can do work between meetings, and the others cannot. So progress can be kind of slow. But on the other hand, we know each other well now, and we get along super well, and we're a good team, I think partly because we're so small. The only advice that I would give is that if it's possible, have somebody in your study group who works, doesn't necessarily have to be work for pay, it can be volunteer work, but works full or a major part of their week in the areas you are studying. For instance, since citizen oversight is one of ours, what we're really looking at besides racism and excessive force, we're lucky enough to have a person in our group who is an investigator for our local citizen oversight board of the city, St. Louis City. And that's just invaluable to have that person there at monthly meetings to steer us or to advise, oh, but don't you know about this? Those people don't need to be league members as far as I know. Although when it does come to reaching consensus on a position statement, only league members are involved in that. That's my current understanding. We have a lot of resources that might be helpful to someone else. The 2 that I've noticed lately that maybe not everyone knows, I didn't know them till 2 weeks ago, is that in Roseville, Minnesota, they did a specifically policing study completed in 2016. And that's available online. And then the other is that in counting how many people have died at the hands of police. There is an organization that I was not aware of who has higher numbers than anyone else, and they are called Fatal Encounters. And that's what I have for you for today. I hope it's been able to show you where we stand.
Thank you, Mary. That I know it's helpful for me to hear that. Appreciate that. Now I'll turn it over to Ashley. I think she'll be presenting for the League of Women Voters of California and what they have done. Probably need next slide, yeah.
Ashley, you're on mute.
Yeah, unmute. It's a good thing I've only got through my name. Okay, so welcome everyone. I am again Ashley Ravichet. I'm the Deputy Director of Social Policy for the League of Women Voters of California. And with me, I have Carolina Goodman. She's my co-chair for the Criminal Justice Committee. And Carolina and I were part of the original task force that helped draft this position. We're here to guide you through our process on the road to adopting either a criminal justice position comprehensively or a community policing position. And this presentation is not meant to suggest a one-size-fits-all. Each community needs to come up with its own reform ideas, reform agenda, and that meets your specific needs and your landscape. So your league, as we've already had a great presentation tonight, your league has already prioritized community policing as a criminal justice issue. So I will preach to the choir here and just remind you all about the intersectionality between the justice system and other issues and movements such as voting rights, immigration, climate change, homelessness, mental health, and affordable housing. And often it always starts from the community policing level. Law enforcement is the first point of contact for these individuals that forces them down a path into the justice system. Your league has the ability to act within the framework of the national positions that Melissa referenced. I would also like to go ahead and add an additional one, which is the death penalty position. It's something that California is currently very actively engaged at a local level, as well as through legislation. And the reason why I would point that out and what that relates to criminal justice for community policing is that the charges, often special charges, that an individual who meets with law enforcement will follow them through the record. And often it's those special circumstances or those special charges, those enhancements that the officers have clicked that box. That's what's putting them into a circuit for a death qualifying case. So I just wanted to quickly reference that. So the League of Women Voters at the U.S. Convention this year, we did adopt a national resolution, which will provide your league an ability to advocate and educate for community policing. Now, I understand what league needs and what league wants are often in conflict, and league members want a position to hang their hat on. They need to feel more secure on the path that they will be choosing. And so I really applaud you for creating already half of what this process is in front of you. And I apologize, it is a really small font. So let me just go ahead and read that. So the first category we have is research. Now, the first part of your presentation with Sandra and Ernest was fantastic. You've already hit a lot of that research of what's happening at the local level. When we created our criminal justice task force, it was a state league sanctioned task force. And our goal was to adopt a position by concurrence. California League actually has a modified version of concurrence that is different than the national concurrence process. It allows us to create a task force where we can independently research the issue so that if a league position needs to slightly be expanded, we are able to do that within the task force consensus. Now, most leagues check with your state league on what your version of concurrence allows you to do. You may not be able to do that. You may have to just adopt a league position by concurrence exactly as it is written. Now, our process took approximately 2 years. It undertook every aspect of a formal league study that league members would have asked for, except it just didn't go through the program planning process of having our members say, let's focus on criminal justice. It was something that our members brought to the state level and asked, hey, we want this task force to be created. So the first thing we did with our goal in mind of doing the process via concurrence was to research all existing positions. Melissa just gave an excellent recap of the 32 criminal justice positions that our league was able to research. We also went and contacted every single state league and asked them if they were aware of a local position that maybe was not on the clearinghouse. The clearinghouse, the National Clearinghouse, is an excellent resource, but it is not fully up to date. So just be careful if you are looking for information. It may actually be out there, just not on the clearinghouse. So I would recommend, if you are going to be digging in a little deeper, go ahead and contact the state leagues and they will know, because things get filed with the state leagues always. So then we created our task force. It was really important since we were looking at things beyond just community policing, but we were looking at all aspects of criminal justice. So we divided ourselves up into subgroups so that each issue could be really vetted. And then also to inquire about questions, consensus, and to work with existing local committees that were already engaged in some of this work. California had a juvenile justice position, and so most of our local committees at local league level were dealing with the juvenile justice aspects, and they had been doing that for 10 plus years. And so we didn't want to step on anybody's toes. We had a goal in mind, but we wanted their feedback and their input and part of their buy-in. Then we just organized. We made sure that we hosted monthly meetings. We created a Google chat group. We made sure that we had contact with each other. It was really important that we invited both rural league members as well as urban league members to the table. We ensured that our task force was diverse in that respect. And then we ensured that anybody who had existing committees also felt that they could contribute as experts in the issue. Then we divided ourselves up into the relevant issue groups so that we could really look at what existing positions throughout all of the National League studies, what they said and how they related to the landscape of California. Every state is different. We have 58 counties in California, and not every league position will apply universally to your area. So it was really important that we identified what would work. And because through our version of concurrence, we were able to adopt, we would flag what wouldn't work. And then we just tracked the community needs. We made sure that we created those observe cores, just like what you're doing currently right now, of trying to figure out if you have citizen oversight or not. And whether or not you have league members on the ground currently engaged with police chiefs or with sheriffs and having community groups, so that you didn't have to remake the wheel. You could tap into those resources. We also researched at the beginning, throughout the whole process, we just kept up to date with reading every article, every book that you could possibly get your hands on the issues. And so that was really important to us that we became subject matter experts. And then we reviewed what we had identified as the positions that we felt strongly that we could concur. We narrowed it with the positions that we thought league members would support. And often those are not the same things. So be strategic. And we also made it a priority to build this entire process into our program planning. It was never presenting at convention floor a new idea that league members throughout the various counties were hearing for the first time. The buy-in was part of not only program planning, the buy-in came from sharing the various versions of our position draft and welcoming any feedback to either where we would edit it or we would give, a thoughtful response of why we were not including that. And then we drafted our position. That was the very last bit. So I urge you, as you're reviewing your position guides and your position goals, that you make sure that you don't have an idea in mind that through your process of researching and bringing league members together, don't be so set on your original draft. Be flexible. It will change. And you're going to have folks coming in with enthusiasm that you may have to say, I'm so sorry, but we cannot take on this issue. Next slide, please. So our position in community policing, our goal goes beyond rebuilding the trust of the community with public input and oversight. The oversight, I stress, this is what we're handling right now. It provides league with an ability to advocate for transparency and accountability. And forgive me, let me just skip there. This is why we're here presenting to you today. So our position specifically calls for changes in policies, training, tactics, and equipment that provide officers with better tools for handling difficult situations. And we look to law enforcement best practices to shape our position and also engaged with stakeholders. Now I will just quickly going back, the Los Angeles League did a formal study in 2015 on community policing. San Francisco League adopted that position by concurrence. So our state league, when we created the comprehensive position, was able to take the initial study and expand it to fit some areas that needed to fill the state level lens. Next slide, please. So the power of league questions. This is really something very important, that you observe your local power dynamics, you identify who has the power to shape these reforms, who's responsible for the oversight, how are individuals held accountable, and is the process transparent? And sadly, I already know that most of these answers will be no. And this is why we're here, helping you engage in this space. And so I would just encourage anyone who has not had an opportunity to read 21st Century Policing. This was one of our major sources of information. It was an Obama administration task force on community policing. It is incredibly long. There are 3 series. The final report really does a great job of narrowing down community policing into a nutshell of 78 pages or so. But it's definitely something that we continue to rely on. And I continue to sit in some stakeholder groups with the San Francisco Police Department and working with various district attorneys to really put a lens back on this document. And that's always the question. Are you doing constitutional policing? Next slide, please. So is this not my slide, or I don't know. This might be another area. Unless, Carolina, are you able to jump into this?
Sure. Prior to the development of a criminal justice position for California, these are positions that we could use. But we found that it did not meet all of the things that we wanted to focus on. And that's why we created a position. Actually, you actually created this for us, but you probably don't remember, but you did. And we also have a list of positions in California that allowed us to act on legislation and do action and advocacy. But now that we have a comprehensive position, we're feeling like we can do a lot more. Can I see the next slide? I'm wondering if that might be the national. We have a web page on national.
I put the link, sorry, excuse me, Caroline, for interrupting. I did put the link in the chat box to your national engagement page.
Oh, great.
That's where I've got that. It's in the chat right now. And this list I just had put in as you're saying, you used it kind of until you got to your position, and as that's one of our options is trying to use current positions. This is, that's what I pulled from your national engagement page as an example.
Let me tell you briefly what's on that page. So on that page, when you click on that link, also there are, when you hover there, there's 3 dots to the right, so you can copy and paste that if you are taking notes. We have some pages that would be helpful. For instance, we have definitions of criminal justice terms. We found that throughout California, not very many people understood what, let's say, alternatives to incarceration might mean. So we defined those terms. Then there is a document on background information, which contains a lot of the research that we did on all of the issue areas. There's a link on the clearinghouse. There's a link for positions in states around the US that have criminal justice positions, and one on juvenile justice. And yes, and we also have a link to the slide that you saw on positions used for criminal justice advocacy. So please take a look at that. We're so happy to support you in this work. Don't hesitate reaching out to us. And I think now we can take some questions. Is that right?
Yes. If anybody has any questions that they want to put in the chat for St. Louis, California, Melissa, and then we'll see if we have a few questions, and then we'll get into our discussion portion after that. See if we have anything coming up in here. He's typing it so I can see what it is. How many league members did you have on your task force in California?
I'm trying to play by the rules.
Yeah.
We had about 20. Ashley, don't you think that's about right?
Yeah, there was definitely folks who would come in. Participation, we're volunteers. So know that things happen when people are passionate, they participate. If they don't necessarily get their way via the consensus of the group, sometimes they leave. But I would never have that as a deterrence. Those who participated always came back. And especially once we passed a position, they were hitting the ground running, asking, how can we use this now? How can we focus? What do we focus on first? And so just, filling in a quick add-on to the slide that's presenting right now is that, yes, league has an ability to act. Yes, your league already can use every single one of those positions. Part of our process was to identify the landscape of where these positions failed us to act. And that's what really helped narrow the language that we used when we drafted our actual position. And so I would recommend that you, in your group, in your task force, that you take a look and you see where do you want to engage, what space, and why can you not use this? It's much easier to use what we've already agreed on than to try to sell it to league members.
And can you articulate again for us what the specific wording of your position is in California? Is that what we saw earlier? Is that, or is there more to it?
That was just a draft, but I'll give you the highlight. Our policing practices is part of our criminal justice position. So we say constitutional policies and procedures established by law enforcement with input from the communities they serve. And if you'd like, I can read, but you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We have about 12 bullet points. I can read them quickly if you like.
Well, is there a link to that on your national engagement page?
Yes, there should be a direct
So
link.
it's written,
Yes.
it's written on there somewhere specifically. If you want to hit the highlights, you don't have to read the whole thing, but I mean, if you want to hit the highlights for us, that would be great.
Yeah, we just, we focus on building public trust and the positive community relationship. It's really important to have community input as stakeholders in drafting the policy. We encourage it at every level. We want police to be accountable via the independent oversight. And then we also really stressed the access to data for officer misconduct or officer conduct in general. We want it to be open, transparent, to disseminate the information publicly about recruitments, policing policies, complaints, combinations. We also really helped try to build into our position support for our officers. We wanted to ensure that they had sufficient psychological services and counseling for stress-related needs. We wanted to ensure diversity in their staffing and that their departments looked like the communities that they were serving. Training was huge. Training about mental health, disabilities, substance abuse. We wanted to require officers to render first aid if they're injured in the pursuit of police action or as a result of police action. Background checks of the officers, and we included as not law enforcement as being sheriffs, as being correctional facility officers, which in our research, they were just statistically, the statistics were horrible on how often correctional officers commit suicide or come home and have abuse in their family because they don't know how to deal with the stress. Really what we focused on in the legislative cycle was that we established de-escalation, and that's the use of time, distance, communications, and available resources for the primary foundation of the enforcement of law. Everything must be met at a de-escalated community policing level. And then authorizing minimal force with individuals. We don't want to see deadly force. So deadly force is only when necessary to prevent imminent death or seriously bodily injury. And so those are the highlights. And there's a lot more that we categorize as other parts of the position, but really they feed in and they support the community policing and constitutional policing. Presumption of innocence, that's the foundation.
That's great. We have another question here about if you've seen any results in your local police departments as a result of your positions in the advocacy you've been doing with this position. Have you seen some tangible results?
Let me briefly talk about legislation that has passed, and as a result, the league, as a result of our position, the league has been able to take action and advocate for certain things. And specifically, I'm talking about the use of force policy that was changed, and Ashley just referred to it. The language is very clear. Deadly force can only take place if it is necessary. Prior to this policy, the police were able to kill someone if it were reasonable. So there is a difference between necessary and reasonable. So one of the things that local leagues are doing now across the state is meeting with their local police departments to make sure that this policy is in place. A new law comes in January 2021 that has to do with training, and our departments trained appropriately so that the policy is fulfilled in the way that it was meant to be. One other thing that was mentioned earlier had something to do with access to police records. That is another law that was passed in California that, because of our position, we're able to advocate for. And actually, would you briefly talk about the Racial Justice Act? That is one that just passed in November, and we are so proud of it.
Yes, actually, the Racial Justice Act that we worked on here was modeled after a North Carolina law that was very short-lived, but you set the stage. And so what the Racial Justice Act does is, I'm going to that slide right now. Forgive me, my script. It changes the law, and it takes civil rights and expanding it into the criminal justice system so that you can no longer seek charges or sentences based on race. And what it allows you to do is it allows individuals to file a motion while they're in the trial setting to state that there was intentional discrimination, racially coded language, racial discrimination, whether it was a jury selection of, you know, a Black man being tried by his peers of all white people, where, you know, every person of color was kicked off the jury, or there was a disparity in the conviction or a disparity in the sentence. And this opens up the access to what policing looks like and how that engagement occurred and what those records are. We also have a law in California called RIPA, or the Racial Identity Profiling Act, which is a data act. It's asking all law enforcement officers to provide information on their stops of an individual's perceived race and other qualifiers, and report that to the Department of Justice so that they can see, is law enforcement disparate treatment, which is not constitutional policing.
All right, thanks.